Okay, so Mike Wade, thank you for taking the time to talk to me and the students at the University of Waterloo today. I know that what you're going to tell them is going to be valuable for them. Digital transformation is something that a lot of organizations are looking at today, and what you have to say will help people that will be working for a lot of those organizations in the future. So, can you first of all tell me about the job that you do now, and so we know where your expertise comes from?
Sure, Peter, I'd be happy to do that. So my name is Mike Wade. I'm a professor of strategy and innovation at IMD, which is a business school based in Switzerland. And it's a business school, unlike most business schools, as we don't have students in a traditional sense. We're almost exclusively focused on executive education. So the people that I normally teach are not undergrad students or even master students. They are practicing executives. In addition to my work as a faculty member at IMD, I also run a research center that we have called the Global Center for Digital Business Transformation. And the objective of the center is to help organizations understand digital disruption and how to respond to the opportunities that it brings, as well as the threats.
So you've been working with a lot of organizations on their own digital transformation. Can you just start by telling me how you would define digital transformation itself?
Sure, we have a definition of that, and our definition of digital transformation is organizational change through the use of digital tools, technologies, and business models to improve performance. So let me just break that down a little bit. Of course, the digital part is important as the foundation and in many respects the impetus for the transformation. But the objective, the outcome, the goal of digital transformation is not to become more digital, in our view, despite the fact that many companies come to us with the request, can you help us to become more digital? But for us, that's not the objective. Certainly, if you want to become more digital, you can do so. All you need to do is spend money. I mean, the tech vendors will be super happy, the consultants will love you, but will it necessarily improve your performance? That's a different question. So that's why improving performance is the key outcome for us of any digital transformation. And the other part of the definition I think is important is the means to get there is through organizational change. So that's the main challenge, the main barrier for most companies is how do they change their organizations in order to take advantage of digital opportunities and respond to threats. And that organizational change comes down to a lot of the things that you might expect, your organizational structure, the way you incentivize people, the way you engage with your customers and workforce, your channel relationships, all those things. So it's a whole lot more, Peter, than just the digital part, in our view.
Makes sense. And why are organizations so interested in digital transformation today? I talk to lots of them too, and it's a frequent subject of discussion. So why is this? How are they being disrupted?
Well, I think it's become a hot topic today, mostly because everybody's talking about it. You open up any business newspaper, magazine, or online, and people are discussing digital tools, technologies, disruption. So it's a huge hype. There's a huge amount of hype in there, and in many cases, there's overhype. But like many things, Peter, I think where there's a lot of smoke, there's fire. So that there really is disruption. It is happening. And so I think for those reasons, organizations are paying a lot more attention to it. Now, how are they being disrupted? We did some analysis where we looked at hundreds of digital disruptors, and we tried to figure out, is there anything that these companies are doing that's common, anything that we can draw conclusions from. And we after looking at all these companies, we decided that there's actually three ways in which they're creating value. You can put it into three different buckets. And those three value types are cost value, they're doing something cheaper than the traditional companies. And the most extreme example of that, of course, is free. The second type of value that they're creating is experience value. So they're doing something which has just a better, more convenient, higher quality, easier, safer type of experience. And the third type of value that these companies are creating is platform value, where they're creating, a large network which has network benefits. So if you think, like, an example might be Uber, where if you look at the first reason that most people tried Uber is because it was cheaper than a taxi. So that's cost value, just coming up with a cheaper alternative to a traditional product or service. But it's not the only reason. I mean, if you look at why people are using Uber today, it's primarily not cost. It's because it's convenience, because they're easy to find. It's because the drivers are nice. It's because the cars are clean. It's because you can see the ratings. So all these things are what we would call experience value. And then finally, you look at Uber. If you travel a lot like I do, and I think you do, one app, you can use it anywhere in the world. That's a great platform to build. And what we're seeing now is companies like Uber are expanding the value of their platform by providing other services like food delivery or logistics. So these disruptors are masters at creating and amplifying these three types of value.
What are the main technologies that are especially featured in digital transformation now?
So the technologies themselves, they shift, they change. So the ones that were most relevant for organizations 3 years ago are not necessarily the same ones today, and in 3 years they'll be different still. So 3 years ago there was a huge focus on mobile and apps, and that's still true today to a certain respect. But I think there's other things that are more important today. So some of these technologies are legitimately hyped, and some of them are overhyped. For me, blockchain is overhyped. I think. It's interesting technology. It's potentially disruptive, but it's really not creating the amount of disruption you would expect, considering the amount of attention that it gets. The one that I think is probably the most disruptive, potential for disruption, is artificial intelligence. Absolutely, without doubt. And not just artificial intelligence, which is not new, but the way machines can learn today, specifically deep learning, where no longer are you just telling a machine what to do, you're giving it tools and it figures out what to do and how to do it. And that is going to be absolutely transformative, I believe, in the upcoming years for organizations, but also for us, for society. So there's a number of technologies that are potentially impactful today. So AI is one of them. Blockchain, cloud analytics, augmented reality, and virtual reality. I think these all have potential for big impacts on organizations.
Absolutely. And how is digital transformation impacting business models for individual businesses, but also the ecosystems that they operate in? How are the business environments changing?
Well, that's a tricky question. I think to answer that, it depends a lot on the industry. I think some industries are seeing very large changes, and some are seeing slower changes, and some are overhyped and some are underhyped. I think the industries that have the core product or service that they offer, when that can be digitized, those companies are necessarily more impacted by digital disruption. So financial services, because you can digitize money, media and entertainment, because you can digitize content, telecommunications, and so forth. These industries, retail, these industries where you can digitize the product or service or big components of it, those are going to be impacted the most and the most quickly. But then, the more B2B industries, the industries that deal with physical products, are probably less directly impacted. However, we've seen a number of occasions where a technology advancement can pull those industries very quickly into a position where they're being disrupted. So we see it now in the pharma industry, we see it in the automotive industry. You know, when I think about the executives that come to go into my programs around digital transformation, it used to be that they were all from, you know, the financial services, media, telcos, retail, CPG. But now we're seeing them come in from oil and gas, mining, minerals, pharmaceuticals. I mean, these industries that you would not expect to be that concerned are suddenly feeling the impacts of digital disruption. And one of the things when you talk about ecosystems is that even the way we traditionally look at industries and think about industries as defined things, it's just not true anymore. It's very difficult to say, you know, what's the difference now between a media company and a telecommunications company? And you look at the disruptors. I mean, the disruptors just don't care about how we define what an industry is. When you look at where Amazon is playing today, you know, at one time it was fairly solidly in retail, but you look at it today, it's in retail, it's in financial services, it's in logistics, it's in media. I mean, you name it. So those companies, those disruptors, like Amazon, you know, they'll go where they see value. If they see trapped value, they'll go. They don't care what we define as being an industry boundary. So even I think thinking about industries is a little bit old-fashioned today.
I mean, you've mentioned that all sorts of different companies are now looking at this. Most areas of the economy are considering how digital transformation might impact them. What do you see as the impact that digital transformation might have on society and people more broadly? What is its impact there?
Again, that's a big question. I think there's lots and lots of impacts that technology can have on society. I think the majority of them, most of them are positive, you know, where we have more information, we're more free to do things than we ever have been in the past. We're enabled by technology in so many different ways that we were not before. Technology has given the ability to join in society and work for people who in the past didn't really have that option. So I think there's a lot of positive things, and the net is positive. I'm an optimist. Where I think it's the concern I have is with job losses, and I know this is achieving a lot of attention these days, and rightly so. I think there will be job losses because of technologies, not just robots, you know, replacing physical labor, but I think, you know, AIs and other intelligent machines replacing cognitive labor. It's going to happen, and it won't be too long before machines are better than humans in a vast majority of tasks, and they do it cheaper, and they do it without complaining, and they do it better. So I think we are going to see job losses. I don't see any way clearly around it, and then society is going to have to deal with that. So, you know, your students are doing exactly what they should do. They're going to a good school, they're taking a good program, and they expect society in return to give them good jobs. And society has done that largely to this point, but I'm not sure how long society will be able to provide jobs to those people in the future. And the worst thing to have is smart, ambitious, intelligent people who don't have purpose in their lives. So I think there's a red flag there. It's there for us all to see, and we could prepare for it. I'm not sure we are preparing for it very well. I'm not sure that this is really on the radar of governments to the extent that it should be. So I think overall, to answer your question, I'm positive about the future, but with that caveat that I think we have to deal with the fact that we're going to see massive job replacement, and we have to prepare for that.
In preparing for it, are there things that the education sector could be doing better? Are there things we should be emphasizing? Can you comment on the role that the education sector has in contributing, preparing for the digital transformation world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the education system with the exception, Peter, of what you're doing with your students, is overall failing us. I mean, the education system, a world which I'm a part of, is really, really slow to change. I mean, you look at industries being slow to change and respond to digital disruption. I mean, the education industry is one of the slowest, and the reason is, I mean, there's the incentives that are built into the education system do not at all promote changing with the times at all. So I don't think, by and large, we're teaching our students, our young people, to be prepared for a world which is going to be quite different than the world their parents graduated into. Although, the education system looks very similar to that world. So I think the education system has a lot to answer for and needs to change, probably radically, structurally, the way it's organized, the topics that are covered, how they're covered. I mean, I firmly believe all this needs to change massively. I mean, one of the things that I've always admired about Waterloo is the co-op program. I mean, this is a great way to give students practical experience that they can then amplify in their academic work. But unfortunately, Waterloo is still very much the exception rather than the rule when it comes to this aspect. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at the money that's plowed into the education system in Ontario and elsewhere, and what we get out of it, and the time that the young people are taken out of being, the productive part of their lives in society to be educated, are we getting a return on that investment? I'm not sure we are, Peter. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what you think. We're doing our best, you and I, but I'm not sure by and large that we're really doing what we need to do.
Yeah, I think there's huge scope for disruption, huge scope for digital transformation, and other types of changes in the education world. I think the model that we have today is very similar to the one that was created maybe 800 years ago or something, with people coming into groups or institutions when the first universities were created, listening to someone talking to them and presenting them with material. And there are large parts of the education system that are still the same. If that was working, then fine, why change it? But at the same time, in many senses, it's not preparing people for the rapidly changing world that we have today. And, the skills that people probably need are their ability to change, to participate in change, and to be able to probably deal with many changes in their career as they go through their lives. So, I think huge scope for disruption in the education sector, and many indicators of where that might come from. There are new models and new providers emerging. But the common problem with a lot of these new providers is that the quality of what they deliver can be suspect. Not all of them have quality problems, but a lot of them do. And I think that for the consumer, looking at what they're going to do educationally, it's very confusing. They got the traditional sector on the one hand that has some guarantee of quality, and then on the other side, with the new provision that is coming into the market, there's a lot of uncertainty. So we could talk about this for a long time. We probably shouldn't, because my next question is the other thing that you mentioned, which is the role of government. Have you thoughts on what that might be? We certainly seem to see in technology broadly that government seems to play catch up quite a bit. What would you say is their role? What should they be doing, and how are they performing with digital transformation?
Well, there's a huge variance when it comes to governments. I mean, when you look at digital transformation and digital literacy and maturity, I mean, I think you look to the public sector for some of the very, very best examples in the world. But you also look to the public sector to see some of the very, very worst, backward examples, failures, wastage. in the world. So you've got one sector which is accounting for, sort of, in some cases, the very best, but in other cases, the very worst, and sometimes within the same government. So there's a huge diversity of maturity when it comes to digital in governments. I think digital transformation has a huge potential positive benefit for governing, for the effective governance, for engaging with citizens in new ways, for providing services to citizens in more effective ways, for saving costs. I mean, all these things. I think there's huge benefits. I think from the let's say the economic standpoint, government should be providing a safe, level playing field for companies to operate, and that has to be updated to take into consideration new digital innovations that may happen. And then apart from that, basically step out of the way, right? And let the companies be as free as possible while still protecting liberties to innovate. Because when the governments step in too much, as we've seen in a number of occasions, the implications of that are hard to predict, but they're rarely positive.
Absolutely. So to go back down to the level of the organization, we've stepped above that or beyond that a bit there, but going back to the organization itself, where should organizations start in digital transformation? Are there first steps that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, there are, and those steps do vary a bit, but I would say in general, a good first step is for organizations is to do an internal analysis of what they're doing at the moment in digital, because most companies, I mean, a quite common conversation I have with executives is, they'll say we're really behind on digital, we're slow, we're not doing anything, we're really not doing anything. And then we go in and we do an analysis and we find out that that's not the case at all. They're doing tons of things. It's just they're all siloed. There's lots of activities they're doing. They're working with AI over here. They're building apps. They're doing things with the cloud. They're doing things with mobile. They've got a blockchain pilot going. They're working with startups. They're doing lots and lots of things. And so often the problem is not doing anything. It's the fact that they're doing too many things, and those things are not coordinated. There's a lot of overlap. They're not necessarily moving in the same direction. That there's no portfolio thinking. They're not strategic. So I think a good first step is to figure out what are you doing today, and then put that up in some kind of a mapping process to figure out, well, here's all the things we're doing. Does it make sense? Do these things make sense? And at the same time, doing an external analysis. And most companies are, reasonably good at knowing about their immediate ecosystems, so that maybe their immediate competitors and so forth. But they're usually pretty poor at new and emerging trends, technologies, regulations, and competitors that might be coming in an adjacent industry that might be coming into their industries. So I would say a very good first step is just to kind of map the landscape internally and externally. And once you've done that, you have a much better idea of where you are, and then you can make a more informed decision about how to move forward.
Are some organizations more likely to be successful than others, and maybe why is that?
Absolutely, no doubt. I mean, there's companies that have responded much more effectively to digital disruption than others. So we did a big study on this. We tried to figure out, what is it that these companies are doing to respond, and there are a number of things that we found. I'll just focus on one of them, and it's no surprise we found that the companies that tend to respond most effectively are the ones that are the most agile. So agility is important, but agility, as many of your students will probably already know, is a huge buzzword today. I mean, everybody talks about agility. You've got to be more agile. but rarely is it defined or defined clearly, or it's just used in terms of, IT methodologies. So we really looked at agility in detail and tried to break down what exactly agility is for companies. And we came to the conclusion that agility is not a single thing at all. It's actually three things. So organizations need to do these three things in order to successfully respond to digital disruption. The first of those three we call hyper-awareness. And hyper-awareness is a capability, it's a sensing capability, but not just it's not just awareness, it's being much more able to sense what's going on in the environments, internal and external, immediate and extended. And of course, digital technologies can play a big role in hyper-awareness. You can have scraping tools, you have social media listening, you can have sensors, all these things out there they're collecting data that can feed into this hyper-awareness. But just collecting the data, Peter, as you know, is not enough. I mean, you can fill your databases with data, but it doesn't necessarily help you. So the second aspect of agility that we found to be important is something we call informed decision making. And informed decision making is using evidence, using the data that you've collected from being hyper-aware, using it to make informed decisions. And the truth is, in most companies, that doesn't happen very much. Still a lot of decisions are made just by intuition. It's people sitting around a conference table looking at each other saying, okay, well, what do you think? What should we do? And then one looks at the other and says, well, what did we do last time? And another one says, well, what is our competitor doing? And a decision is made. And all that data that's collected, all that information is basically ignored. So it's informed decision making is about sort of sharing, collaborating, using analytics. It's not about replacing intuition, but it's about informing intuition, and much more so using the data. But just making the decision is not enough either, and that's where we get to the third element of agility that we've identified, which is something we call fast execution. So it's turning those decisions into action, but quickly. A lot of companies just get stuck with analysis paralysis. They make the decision, nothing happens. So it's about bringing new resources when you need them, allocating those resources. It's about testing and learning. It's about fast fail. It's all those things. And because, it's about balancing speed with perfection. Because when you move, when you make a decision, when you act, then you create other information, and that feeds into the hyper-awareness. So we find that organizations that tend to be responding well to digital disruption tend to be strong on these three elements: in hyper-awareness, informed decision-making, and fast execution.
Very interesting and very helpful. In doing those things, this clearly will mean for many employees significant changes. What is the impact there, and what can be done to enable and encourage employees to play the role that they should play?
So a lot of roles will change, that's for sure. So companies have to recognize that employees are going to resist, especially if they see it as a threatening. So they really have to communicate clearly, and probably much more clearly than they think they need to, about the change. They also need to provide tools and training for those employees to help them change. My view on this is that most people are willing to change if they're given a good reason to do so and they're given the tools to support that. People aren't necessarily averse to change, I don't believe. And in truth, even though companies may look at their employees and say, they're a bunch of losers, they're so old, they don't change, I can't get them to do anything that I want them to do, they hate new things. Normally, the fault there is not with the employees, it's actually with the leaders. They've designed a system, they designed an organization in which doing things the same way is rewarded. So people are going to do things the same way. So I think it's a lot about dealing with organizational factors, cultural factors, these types of things, in order to create an environment where change is seen as being okay. Change, experimentation is okay. Trying new things is okay. Failing is okay. And then I think there's a much better chance of getting the output that you need. So employees probably have to think about how the skills that they need, they're not going to get them probably from the education system as we discussed earlier. So they have to have the attitude that their own development is not a thing that you do at the beginning of your career, it's a thing that you do all the way throughout your career.
Absolutely. And just to continue on that theme for my second last question, how do organizations then move from this position where everybody, they wanted people to do things the same way and not to change? How do they become more innovative? This is an area which many organizations are focused on today. Innovation is a hot topic. What would your advice be on how to become more innovative?
Well, that's a tricky question. Like a big part of it is cultural. You have to have a culture that supports innovation. But I do think there's three things. In fact, it's not just me who thinks. I mean, the literature is quite clear that there's three things you need in your organizational culture to support innovation. And the first one is autonomy. Autonomy in time mostly, but also resources. I mean, if people are busy, if people are full of meetings, from the moment they get in and emails and everything else, and if they're full of tasks, they have no time, they're not going to innovate. Not because they don't want to innovate, they just don't have time to innovate. If they're not given resources, people, money, budgets to innovate, they won't do it. So I think one of the first things is you have to have processes which allow people to have time. It doesn't need to be to the extreme of Google's 20% time, but time to innovate and some resources to innovate. It just won't happen. So I think autonomy is one extremely important part. The second part is rewards. We are human. We respond to incentives. And if there's no incentives to innovate, no incentive or a disincentive to innovate, I mean, people are not going to do it, or they'll do it once and then they'll never do it again. So incentives can be traditional incentives, financial incentives, but they can also be rewards. Implicit rewards. It could be a recognition in a newsletter or some kind of an award. And I think those extrinsic and intrinsic rewards go a long way to supporting the behavior that you want. And if that behavior is innovative behavior, you should reward innovation. And it's not enough, by the way, and many companies do this, to put it in the job description. That doesn't count, right? I mean, you have to have rewards that people recognize. And the third one, I think, is the most important one, and that's psychological safety. It's essentially a tolerance of failure, that it's okay to fail. It's not a celebration of failure. I mean, let's be clear about failure. I mean, a lot of people talk about failure today. Failure is good, right? Failure is not good. Don't believe it. It's not. You students out there thinking about this, I'm pointing my finger now. Failure is not good. Don't fail. But if you have to fail, and often you do, learn. And that's the key. Do it cheaply, do it quickly, and make sure you learn from it. And then maybe you'll fail less in the future. So that tolerance of failure, that psychological safety, I think is super important. So, the literature is fairly clear. Those three things: autonomy, rewards, and psychological safety. If you have those three, you tend to have more innovation in your organization. And if you look at the big digital players who are quite innovative, you can recognize those three things pretty easily and pretty quickly.
Good advice, and I'm going to ask you for one more piece of advice. The students who are watching this, many of them will be entering the workplace soon if they haven't already. How can they better contribute themselves to digital transformation in their organizations?
Well, you're doing a lot of it already. You're going to a good school with a good reputation. Those of you in the co-op program, you're getting real world experience. I mean, I think that's great. A lot of companies these days are developing reverse mentoring programs, which allows you to spend time with executives So you can share your knowledge with them as well as them sharing their knowledge with you. If you have a chance to do that, I think that's a great opportunity. I would say, one piece of general advice, not necessarily to do with digital transformation, but just generally, there is a tendency these days, because I see it quite a lot, of students when they go into a career or a job. They think and act very much about what that job can do for them. Sometimes you even get these things, I think this job is really good for me because, I can develop this skill or that skill, and it's, on a stepping stone to somewhere else. You can think that, but just don't say it, because, companies are much, much more interested in what you can do for them, not what they can do for you. So, if you have the instinct to talk about contribution, talk about it in the sense of what I, as a student, what I can bring to the organization, how I can improve the organization. And then you're much, much more likely to have a friendly voice on the other side. And if you do benefit the organization in those ways, you will find that you will also get a benefit from that. So I think I do see a tendency today for students to be thinking very much in terms of what the job can do for them. And I think it'd be good to turn that around to what you can do for the company, what you can do for the job.
As JFK said many years ago about the US. I think great. Thank you, Mike. All of this, I think, is very valuable for the people who will be watching it, not least your last point about thinking about what they can do. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. It's very good of you to do this.
My pleasure, Peter. It was I enjoyed talking with you, and to all of the students who may be watching, best of luck in your careers. And you're entering a world that's being disrupted. So your timing is good. Go out there and make a difference.